Just as a reminder, you can visit us at thoughtsexpanded.com. That's thoughtsexpanded.com to sign up for our amazing Patreon exclusives, listen directly, and share our latest episodes with your family and friends. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thoughts Expanded podcast. And I am Rabb, and I'm joined, as usual, by Wiggy.
What up?
And Jeff.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about, I would say, a hodgepodge of subjects. I expect us to go on many tangents, but the primary focus... The primary focus of the episode is, and I'm holding it up for any patrons who have video, Chaos, the book Chaos by Tom O'Neill. This book came out, I think, in late 2019. I got a copy for Christmas 2019, I think, actually. And I only just got around to reading it, like, in the last month. But it's really good. And so I want to talk about it. And even though the information is maybe a little bit like already kind of disseminated, I understand Joe Rogan talks about this book a lot. Has he read it? Does anybody know?
Yeah, he had the author on.
Makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, so yeah, it maybe is widely known information at this point, but I still think it's if people haven't heard that episode of Joe Rogan, or if they only listen to our podcast, for instance, this is useful information. It fits very well into many things we've already discussed. So
it's wild.
It is wild.
Well, we've got the three ranges of knowledge on the contents of this book. We've got Jacob, who has read it. We've got Wiggy, who likes people that have read it. And we've got me, who I didn't hear about it until you guys said we were talking about it. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't, for your sake, I just go ahead and give a brief synopsis of what it's about, and kind of where, like, what it's trying to, like, points it's trying to drive. So it's about the Manson murders. Are you familiar with that, Jeff?
Sure. Charles Manson. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is the central part of the book, right? I mean, that's like the main thing. The main story that the book tells is actually the story of Tom as an investigator over about, I would say, a period of 25 to 30 years. He basically, I think it's in 1998 or something, he got an assignment from a magazine to write an article about Charles Manson. And so he wanted to get a new angle, basically, right? And so he started talking to some people that, like, maybe weren't part of the mainstream narrative, people who were connected to the case, but, weren't witnesses in the court case or something, right? And he found a lot of things that kind of just didn't add up. And so obviously he spent the last more than 20 years working on trying to fit those pieces together. And I would say in some ways failed. I mean, he did not come up with something that is a unified story of, like, what actually happened, that's backed up with evidence. He did come up with a lot of potential things that are strange and really, I think, are worth looking at as individual occurrences and possibly as something larger that just really cannot be fully grasped.
Okay. So I know this involves the CIA somehow, right?
Yes. The full title of the book is Chaos, and then the subtitle is Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s.
Okay. Now, I think I heard a story, I don't know if this was Manson or the Unabomber, about one of them, like, undergoing some kind of, like, psychological torture. And
You're jumping the...
Well, I mean...
I just want to know, am I thinking of the same guy?
Yes.
Yeah, Manson was in his early life. He was spent more than half of his first 30 years in various types of actual federal prison, which is apparently quite strange. It's unusual for juvenile delinquents to go to federal prison, and it's I would say it's unusual for people to be in federal prison in general. I mean, unless they're like state enemies, right? So he spent, like, he got in trouble for a variety of things. One of the things was in one of the correctional facilities he was in as a younger child. He got in trouble for like raping one of the other boys. And so he ended up spending a lot of time in prison. And I don't know that it's mentioned in the book that he was psychologically tortured as part of that necessarily. I'm not sure that that's covered as something that happened for sure. But one of the things the book talks about a lot is the way that he would use LSD to basically mind control other people. And so it's possible that something like that was done to him so that he could learn the technique, right? That's very possible that experiments like that were potentially performed on him. And maybe without LSD, it's possible that LSD was kind of like the X factor, because it was only discovered, when he was first coming out of this penitentiary system, right? Around that time, only slightly before that. So either maybe it's that they had some earlier versions of those drugs that they tested on him, or maybe they psychologically tortured him without that kind of stuff. And then he kind of maybe with some help, put the pieces together to use LSD along with those torture techniques to basically completely mind control people.
Interesting.
Yeah, so back to your point with the Unabomber, and we can go ahead and tangent. We'll be jumping all over the place. So there's this guy, and this is going to kind of lead into some things that I think Rabb wants to talk about too, which there's this guy named Jolly West.
Right.
And Jolly West I believe he was a psychiatrist, correct?
I'm not 100% sure. He was a doctor of some kind.
Yeah. He was a doctor of some kind, and some of this information is going to be completely wrong. But the way that I remember this is that Jolly West has been connected to multiple very, very bad people who had all come into contact with LSD in some very, very negative, bad way. The Unabomber went to, I believe it was Harvard, right? He was a student. Right. He was a student at Harvard. And while he was there, was one of the people who the CIA tested LSD on. And so there's and Jolly West was attached to that. Jolly West also multiple times visited Manson.
Yeah. I mean, in the book, Tom O'Neill is unable to prove that. They're in the same place at the same time. He is unable to prove 100% any connection to them between. It's up to the reader to kind of assume that maybe they connected. I can talk about the place they were in. It seems to me, based on the fact that they were in such a small place together, they probably did connect. But there's no proof of that. What there is proof of, what was revealed about Jolly West in when Chaos came out, like Tom O'Neill was the person who actually uncovered this, is that he was getting orders from Sidney Gottlieb, who is the person in charge of MK Ultra. So that is new information as of 2019 when this book came out. What's also interesting about Jolly West is that he is the last person who interviewed Jack Ruby, who's the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. So Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK, and then as he was in custody, Jack Ruby came up and assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald. And Jack Ruby was actually kept in custody. He was not assassinated another time. That would be hilarious, but no, he was not. He was kept in custody, but he did go completely insane. And his breakdown began basically after he talked to Jolly West. So it's unclear whether Jolly West used some kind of drugs or something like that to trigger his breakdown. I mean, that is probably the case, but there's no, necessary proof of that either. Just if you kind of connect the dots.
So yeah, so you think about MK Ultra, and you think about all the different things that happened and all of the different people who Jolly West was in contact with during this time period, and all the bad things that happened, you can start to put some dots together. There's no proof, he did anything directly, but he came out of that jail cell saying that the dude was fine and there was nothing wrong with him. And then literally within 12 hours, the guy's losing his mind.
Right.
Like, this is also the guy who was in charge of doping Johns, who would go to MK Ultra. They would dope Johns who were going to whorehouses just to see how they'd react on LSD.
Right. They had a false wall. There were people, interacted with prostitutes while they'd been dosed by the prostitute, basically unknowingly, with a bunch of LSD. Yeah, pretty wild stuff. One interesting thing before we get off Jack Ruby, after talking to Jolly West, he basically claimed that the United States was the Fourth Reich, and that that there were active Holocaust-style camps going on where Jews were being rounded up. Like, he claimed all that stuff was true. I would assume it's not true, but that is what he began to believe. Yeah, that's what he believed. That's what he would keep saying in court. Like, that he basically said, like, none of this matters. It doesn't matter. He couldn't remember why he assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, and he would keep saying, like, no, this doesn't matter because they're literally rounding up the Jews right now in the U.S., which is completely wild statement. And somehow he was made to believe that, or he came to believe it one way or another, right? And to me, it seems logical that he may have been made to believe something along those lines. So getting back to Charles Manson, though, and so I kind of described a little bit about his early life. He eventually got out, and the middle part of the book talks a lot about how probation system. The probation system was unusually kind to him. And this is one place where Tom O'Neill is not really able to find any hard evidence, any smoking gun of, like, orders to let Manson loose and, like, keep letting him loose no matter what crimes he did. But he did find a lot of things that are just, like, looking at together, you kind of want to connect the dots and assume that there were some orders to basically, anytime this guy was caught doing a crime, just let him loose again, even if that crime violated his parole. Because basically, as soon as he came out of the prison system, he was on parole. And basically, as soon as he came out of the prison system, he began doing things like auto theft, being with 16-year-olds. What do they call that? Statutory rape, right? He was caught for that, and, like, I think giving drugs to minors, that kind of stuff. He was, I think that all the people he was involved with were, like, not like children, but they were children legally, right? And some of them at least. And so no matter how many times he would get caught and arrested by local police, he would have to go to a judge for a probation hearing, and then that judge would let him off the hook. And this happened with multiple judges. And he had a particular parole officer for a little while, the one that he had right after coming out of prison, who acted as a character witness with him for certain judges. And that wasn't his parole officer at the time when he was arrested for those crimes. It was his parole officer from right after he left the federal penitentiary system. So, like, why exactly that guy cared, like, what? And Tom O'Neill actually interviews that guy, and he basically said that he thought, like, what he thought was that the reason that Manson kept getting away with everything is just because the parole system in California was very lax at that time, right? Whether that's true, probably not, but at least that's what that guy seemed to believe, and that's what he told Tom O'Neill. Talking about, maybe now it makes sense to kind of get into when he potentially interfaced with Jolly West. There was this community in California. It was kind of like outside of the major cities. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Let me look it up real quick in the index, because I think the name of it is kind of important. Let me find that place.
So you talking about the medical?
Well, not the name of the medical facility, but like at the place where it actually was. I think it was called Haight Ashbury. Haight is spelled Haight, and that was like a area in Northern California where a bunch of hippies had gathered. It became like almost like a magnet for people who wanted to get away, like people would move to like San Francisco and like Los Angeles to a lesser degree to become hippies, to like they would travel across the country and like give up their lifestyle and, kind of go into a like free love lifestyle. Like that was something that was happening regularly in the 60s. But then this place, Haight Ashbury, was a place where they would go to get away from San Francisco. Like if they felt like being in a city at all was kind of like too restrictive. There's also, there was clinics there. There was a particular clinic that Manson would frequent, and he would bring, like, he started to basically put together this organization that he called the Family, in which him and a number of women and maybe a couple of men who were kind of just like around, and it was effectively like a sex and LSD cult. And it was clear to people who observed it that he was really in charge. Like he was, like the women really respected what he had to say, almost to like an unnatural degree. So, I mean, obviously that's something that could happen with just a regular cult, right? You don't technically need LSD to do that. But he was brainwashing people. So, I mean, LSD doesn't hurt. Like that seriously doesn't hurt when you're trying to brainwash somebody.
Yeah.
So him and the Family would frequently come into this clinic to get treated for STDs, actually. And so that is where he probably encountered Jolly West, who had a facility that was not this clinic. It can't be proven that he went to this clinic, but he had a facility in the same town. And in the same town, he hired 4 to 5, I think, researchers who were like, they didn't really understand what they were doing. They would basically just provide a safe space for people to do drugs, to come into that house and do drugs, as long as they were okay with people taking notes on them. And then they were just told to take notes on what those people were doing. And what's odd about it is that, like, didn't really know why they were being paid to do this. So what is possible is that, Jolly West was there for other reasons and had to make it look like he was doing something official. Or maybe there was something they were actually gaining off watching those people doing drugs, and it's just not clear to the researchers what it was, right? Probably both.
Yeah, I would think so. Like, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they were like long-term effects of extended drug use or something. I could see like reasons for that to exist, but probably not enough for people to be employed.
Right.
For it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're saying, if I remember correctly, I believe the belief is that that clinic was where Manson was getting his LSD from.
Yeah,
that's where he could have gotten it, and because he would go there, they would go there so frequently that could be a supply place for his LSD that he would then take back and use on all the people that were around him. So,
not that LSD was particularly hard to get a hold of back then, though, right? I mean,
it wasn't, but he also had it in really large quantities, so like it was kind of a little bit suspicious. There was also an interesting angle, which is that a lot of hippies in that town were turning to speed. This is mentioned in the book. I'm not exactly sure. Do you guys know what's meant by speed? Is that meth?
I think so. I think it's an amphetamine of some kind.
Okay. Yeah. But either way, right, what was interesting is that Manson was very anti-speed. And so it is possible that and I think it's even true that like some people were doing legitimate research, like the free clinic that he would go to was doing research on like trying to keep people off speed. So that was something, that was sort of an angle of it too. He was very against it.
Speed is meth. Speed is.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's like maybe a front. I mean, that could be something that they were pretending to do, but weren't really doing it, or that's something they were legitimately doing. It's really not clear a lot of times. Usually it seems like it's both, right? That they're legitimately doing research on drugs. They're also doing something like under the surface that people wouldn't approve of if they knew that they were researching that, right?
Interesting. So tell me more about the family. Like, did they have like a goal? Like, was Manson trying to lead them towards something that, like, was there a selling pitch for being in the family? What was the purpose of joining it?
So I understand that he would basically find people who, well, first, I mean, he basically would target women, but he would find women who were not, like, who were kind of like down on their luck and convince them to join that way. I mean, like, the typical, like, cult target, right? Somebody who feels isolated, right? But effectively, he, like, when the family was in court, like, years later after the murders, it became clear that they believed that Manson was like a reincarnation of Jesus, and that like time and space and reality was entirely an illusion, and that they're like so effectively, and also that killing somebody, like that somebody dying, was them going back to God, and so it didn't really matter if you killed somebody because you were sending them back to God sooner. So I would say that's probably the core of their, like, metaphysical beliefs. One thing that the book focuses on, especially in the very beginning and very end, is the narrative that came out of the court case. And so I dodged around that when you asked me what the family was trying to do, because what Tom O'Neill is trying to show in the book, like what he stumbles onto very early on, is that the narrative that came out of the court case is likely false. So I want to come back to that one. Like, that is a question that if you just ask somebody who had never read this book or heard of it, but then they were familiar with Charles Manson, if you ask them what he was trying to do, they might theoretically, if they remembered it, basically say what came out of the court case, right? So I think that it's basically what the short synopsis of what came out of the court case is what Tom O'Neill calls the helter-skelter narrative.
See, I've read that before. Okay.
Right. And so we could get back to that when I think though first I want to talk about, like, the facts of the murder, like, just to be completely clear. And there were multiple murders, actually, but one of them was really high profile, and that was the murder of Sharon Tate and the people in Roman Polanski's house. So Roman Polanski was away on business, and his 8-month pregnant wife and a number, I would say, orbiters of Roman Polanski were all murdered by presumably 4 family members who were completely, or maybe it was 5, who were completely, like, brainwashed into doing this. I mean, this is at least the main, that is probably true, that they were murdered by the family members and not somebody else. I mean, it's not 100% clear, but it's likely true. Some people were stabbed like 80 plus times, like, so they were obviously stabbed after they were dead. They also, like, wrote stuff on the walls, like, in blood. Like, they wrote, like, time to die pigs, like, stuff like that. And so it was very, very, very over the top, like, completely gratuitous violence. And this happened at a large house in Hollywood. So obviously there was a lot of panic when immediately after it happened, right? Like, what exactly is going on? Who's behind this? Am I next? That kind of stuff.
Who was Roman Polanski?
Roman Polanski is a famous director who, I guess, he got, like, in trouble more recently for pedophilia, I think. I think he's kind of back allowed in the mainstream culture again, kind of, maybe, I don't know. But he, for a while, at least, he was not looked favorably upon because of, like, statutory rape style stuff. And he's a really famous director. I mean, you could look up, like, let me just look at top Roman Polanski movies.
2005's Oliver Twist, The Ghostwriter,
Rosemary's
Carnage.
Yeah.
The Pianist, which is a fantastic movie. The Ninth Gate.
Okay.
Macbeth.
So
apparently Rush Hour. Yeah. Anyways, so he's a prolific director. And it can't be completely ruled out the possibility that he was somehow aware or involved in this, and it was covered up. I mean, it's not like there's no evidence of that, but like it seems suspicious that he was like, out of town for such a long time. And, it seemed like he was like, some people claim that he was like having a falling out with his wife. So, I mean, it's not completely out of the question that he somehow had either foreknowledge or direct involvement in planning this.
Interesting.
So the question becomes here, right? Let's assume that that's the case. Let's just make an assumption leap and say that Polanski, he's sick of his wife. He's sick of all these people hovering around all the time. They're annoying. He doesn't like them anymore. How does somebody who is that affluent in the circles that he runs or convince literal crazy people to do that type of murder? Right. So let's assume, based on that fact, what kind of people would a director of that stature maybe come into contact with, right? So this director researches for movies. He has, he has really rich friends. It's not unlikely that one of those people is either knows somebody or is in.
Right.
And so they say, okay, let's get the crazy people to do it. We tell Manson, okay, you got to do the thing. He sends his crazy people out to go do the thing, right? Because it seems like they've been brainwashed into doing it because they're fucking nuts now, right? Like, what other reason does a group of people just have to run into a mansion and kill a whole bunch of people? So that's a one way to think about it. Not that that's, we don't know, but that's just a off the wall statement, but
sure,
it tracks.
Yeah. One thing that's definitely true is that there was another murder the following night where they killed two people, one of which was named Rosemary LeBlanc. Sorry. I'm not sure if their names actually matter. He killed two people the following night. One very interesting fact of the way that the cases were handled was that it took 4 months for people to put together that these were the same murderers, even though they had written very similar things on the walls. And part of the reasoning for that officially is that they were handled by two different police departments, like Los Angeles County versus, I think, like the city police or something like that. But that, like, whether that's actually true, it seems a little bit too, like, there was a lot of stuff in the book about how specifically the investigation into Manson after the murders happened was bungled, and so much so that it looks like intentional bungling. People who, and he interviewed some of these people who should have been like very sharp detectives, not putting together the kind of obvious facts of who did this, or not necessarily who did this, but like even just the fact that the two murders were connected. Right? It was obviously some people did put together that fact, and what the official story was is that it was a copycat case, which, I mean, that did happen, but also why?
Very next night, though? Like,
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So at this point, let me just say that we're getting to the point where there are so many people involved in fucking up or cooperating that it's feeling less and less like a conspiracy to me, just because it seems so unlikely that this many people could keep their mouths shut.
Right.
It just sounds like almost like this like perfect storm of the American bullshit like coalescing into Charles Manson's shenanigans. But yeah.
One thing that's interesting is that after the murders occurred, but before the family was arrested, there was a raid on their property near Los Angeles by I believe the county police, the sheriffs, who, and it was what I think is at that point it was like the largest police raid in history or something, and they brought a bunch of people out there to effectively do, like, a few people got arrested. Manson was found to be in possession of stolen credit cards, which should have violated his parole. There were a bunch of stolen VW Beetles on the property that they were converting into dune buggies, and nobody actually got arrested for that because it was impossible to prove who had actually stolen them. But I mean, that doesn't really track with how the police normally operate. Normally, they would keep somebody in custody even if it's impossible to prove, right? So it's pretty wild that there was a huge raid on their property and then they weren't kept in custody after that for the murders. Like, nobody put two and two together. Nobody could find a shred of evidence that those people had come and did anything, like murdered a bunch of people in Hollywood Hills. It's I don't know. It's just absurd, really, how bad of an error the police were making in bungling this investigation.
Yeah, it does sound absurd. Like, I guess it's hard for me to imagine something like this happening, like, on a small scale. Like, I could see, okay, maybe, like, on a governmental scale, this being something. Like, it may, like, on the CIA level, I could see them maybe controlling all of this. But, like, I can't imagine it being just, like, any smaller than that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
As far as, yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that if it was a conspiracy, the explanation for what you're saying is basically like the regular cops weren't in on it, and they would do their job and arrest those people when they were found to be committing crimes, and then eventually they get in front of a judge, and the judge has, you know, for a reason that he can't explain, suddenly he gets a phone call that says your wife and family are going to die if you don't let this guy go, or something along those lines.
Okay.
Right? And so he's not in on the conspiracy either. The only thing he knows is that somebody really wants to protect this guy. You know, I would think it's kind of along those lines, I would say. If he was being protected at the highest levels of government or whatever, I mean, not the highest levels, probably the president or whatever didn't know about him, but like Sidney Gottlieb may have directly known about Charles Manson and been his advocate within the entire legal system. So what else? Maybe we should talk about a little bit about the trial. Eventually they do. Oh, actually, let me mention one character that's interesting. There is a guy who Tom O'Neill brings up that he can never really exactly figure out what happened with this guy. His name is Reeve Whitson. And this guy was hanging around. Supposedly, there was one witness who I don't think was interviewed as part of the trial, but somebody who made this claim in his book that that Whitson and Manson went together to the scene of the murder, and it's not clear whether that happened before or after the murders happened. Whitson is somebody who is 100% a CIA officer, like someone who actually worked in the CIA. He he was dead at the time when Tom O'Neill even started the story, but his daughter confirmed that that's something he was doing, and he had confirmed connections to the OSS, which is the organization that existed before the CIA. Like, it was the proto-CIA during, I think, World War II, and that guy is all over this case in ways that, at least the murders, not necessarily the pre-Manson, like the family building and all that stuff, but at least the murders, he's all over that in ways that, like, don't really add up and totally make sense.
Well, the first question is, why would a CIA operative who's not in the FBI be around murders?
Sure.
Like, that's the first question. So what is this? What's a guy who's supposed to be doing international information gathering doing around murders?
Sure.
Like, that's not their jurisdiction. They have no reason to be there. So
the title of the book, Chaos, comes from a CIA program of the same name, and the goal of that program was roughly to prevent armed uprising by African Americans in the United States. And the connection to that is fairly interesting. I think we can kind of get into it as we talk about the trial, but it's very possible that the reason Manson was allowed to do these murders was related to that program. Because what happened through the course of the trial, and Tom O'Neill's enemy in this book, like his arch rival basically, is a guy named Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor against Charles Manson. And he was the lead prosecutor of the Charles Manson case. And he also wrote the main book on Charles Manson called Helter Skelter. That became the mainstream narrative, at least until this book came out. I can't say what's the mainstream narrative today. I guess probably still Helter Skelter, but it seems to me like people who actually know about this stuff at this point, like people who remember the name Charles Manson, like they probably do know at least about Tom O'Neill and have heard, what he has to say about it.
Remind me again when Tom O'Neill's book came out?
2019.
Yeah. Okay.
So Helter Skelter, the idea of it is that Charles Manson believed he was getting messages directly from the Beatles. So Beatles songs were written for him, basically. And that's where the words Helter Skelter come from, because that's in a Beatles song, and he would say that a lot. But the idea of Helter Skelter is that he believed that there was going to be a race war between black people and white people, and that he and his followers could be protected by basically camping out in the desert and being away from everybody. And that the idea of Helter Skelter, like why it applies to the murders, is because, the theory is that he was doing that because it wasn't happening. And so he basically did those murders and tried to frame the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
And so that's why the reason that on the walls it was written like, fuck you pigs and all that stuff, to kind of use the language of the Black Panthers at the time. And that may actually be true in a literal sense. Like it's possible that people did manipulate him and really did actually want to blame the murders on the Black Panthers. And then they realized that there was so much goddamn evidence that didn't happen, that and that Manson did it, that like they kind of just had to flip him, like they had to give him up. So, it's very possible that in someone's ideal world, we never found out about who the culprit was, and it was blamed on the Black Panther Party. I don't know that that's so it's not necessarily completely false. What is false is that the main thing that Tom O'Neill uses to take down Vincent Bugliosi's case, like the case that was taken against Charles Manson, and many people said that he interviewed said that this really could have overturned the verdict and let Manson free. Manson's dead now, but people who were talking to Tom at the same time that Manson was alive said that like this could actually get him off the hook if you wanted to try to do that. What Bugliosi did was he buried a piece of evidence that a guy named Terry Melcher had been to see Manson several times before and after the murders. And Terry Melcher was a key witness in the case. He never mentioned this fact, and obviously that's enough information for a mistrial. And Tom proves through a note in Bugliosi's handwriting that he did know about this evidence and approved of it being buried. And so the guy Terry Melcher, like what he was actually doing, it's not 100% clear. It doesn't actually seem like he was giving orders to Manson. It seemed almost like he was a member of the family. Like he was a somebody who, like, there was one witness's account who, like, from before the murders, I think, that said that he went there. Once again, when I say witness, I don't mean witness in the case. I mean witness that Tom O'Neill interviewed, right? Who basically said that Melcher went there and was like begging for something. He was like kissing Charles Manson's feet and trying to convince him to do or not do something in particular. So it's really, this guy in particular is really odd, and like why he matters is not 100% clear to me. But the fact that he was there to testify about, I'm trying to remember exactly what it is that he testified about, like what was supposed to be his, like, the decisive part of the case, right? Let me find that. Why can I not find his name in the back.
There's so many layers of crazy shit.
Oh yeah.
Like it just keeps going and going and going and going. That you have to remember the time frame in which this shit happened.
Yeah, sure.
Like,
can I give a little aside while you're looking that up?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
yeah.
So there is a prominent Nazi old man in Indianapolis who lives off of Emerson Avenue Emerson near Washington. And he always flies like a Nazi flag and like don't tread on me flag. In the last couple of years, he spray painted Helter Skelter in red spray paint on his house. Yeah, he's really, really crazy. So every time you say Helter Skelter, that's what I think of, is that crazy spray paint on that house.
I'm not finding exactly the details. I don't know. I think I would have to reread a chapter or two of this book to actually be able to summarize it correctly. So I won't try. Feel free to pick up the book yourself and figure out exactly why Melcher is important to the case. So what's clear is that people who were collaborating with the prosecution were involved in the murder somehow. So, I mean, or at least heavily involved in the family, right? It is clear that Melcher was somebody who visited their ranch frequently, and he was also a key witness against them, and that was something that was never brought up. And that, exactly why Bugliosi wanted to cover for him, like what he knew, is kind of unclear. But the fact remains that the prosecution was connected in a way that's very suspicious to the murders themselves.
I believe this is back to your point about that Helter Skelter, like the actual chaos program and stuff like that. I believe this is during the time, it was during the time of the Black Power movement. For some reason, whole phrase is eluding me. Like the civil rights movement, like the whole civil rights movement. So one of the things that the government was trying to dissent during that time, like there's a lot of evidence that points towards that. I'm not going to say it definitely, but like there's a lot of evidence that points towards that the government was trying to inflame the situation, because the civil rights movement was relatively peaceful from the African American side. Like it was relatively peaceful. However, from the white side, it was very chaotic and very brutal a lot of the time, and especially by police forces and all of that. How this connects into the future, we move past that point in history and we move into the era of the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War became very unpopular. And that was around the same time that the hippie movement was really going. Like it was really coming up. It was really going. There was lots of anti-war sentiment. There was, it was just very prominent. That was the exact same time when they started banning all of the drugs.
Sure.
So that was when they started banning LSD, when they started banning weed, when they started banning all the stuff and making them all Schedule I drugs, because what they were trying to do was essentially starve the hippies to the point where they wouldn't care whether or not there's a war anymore.
Yeah, or arrest prominent leaders, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think effectively Manson was almost like a way, like at least maybe it was the plan to just blame those murders on the Black Panther Party and let him get away with it and do more murders and blame them on the Black Panther Party too, until that didn't work anymore. But effectively, he did what actually happened after he was caught and there was a court case is that this really tarnished the hippie movement, right? It had tarnished drug culture. Mm-hmm. So it was used to do that. At the point when when the cat was out of the bag and he was already caught and, that kind of stuff, somebody probably decided that the best thing to do was to make this into a public referendum. And it really was a very public trial. I mean, it went on for months. It was on TV. And at that point, there weren't a lot of trials on TV. There wasn't a lot of news. I mean, there was not like today where this would be like if 7 people were murdered because of a drug crazed lunatic, like that would probably be the news for like 2 days, maybe at most, absolute most, if it even make a headline. But I mean, back then it was a really public trial, and it was a public referendum on LSD and hippie culture.
I mean, this was like the crescendo of the moral panic, right?
Yeah,
like where it all like came to a head. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're talking about, you know, this is where people really start to hate the 3-letter organizations that we have, right? This is where a lot of that really feeds from, because like people hate the CIA because of all the stuff that's been attributed to the CIA. Most people can see, okay, there's enough connective links here to make the what I think is a valid argument that the CIA has probably done some bad shit, right? Like we can pin the Kennedy assassination on them. We can pin this shit with, you know, we can pin the Unabomber on them. We can pin this shit on them. We can pin the, you know, there's just enough there. And with the FBI, you know, the crackdown on alcohol, which is the beginning of their organization, the crackdown on drugs, and
well, in the FBI, it's a lot more obvious that they were involved. Like that they were probably involved in the Martin Luther King assassination. And that they were targeting him and other prominent Black leaders. Like that is a lot more clear with the FBI. It's probably true of the CIA too. It's just less clear.
Yeah,
I think sometimes I forget that these 3-letter organizations and like a lot of the, like, I forget how young they are. Like they're not like these ancient like institutions that must be a part of our country, you know? Like these are things that were created during times of like war, and you know, and for some reason we've decided that, okay, well, they just got to be here forever.
Yeah.
Like the CIA, we just have to deal with the CIA. We just have to deal with the FBI. We just have to deal with Homeland Security. You know, these are things
that was created during our lifetimes.
Yeah. Like, it's kind of crazy that we don't hear more conversation about why aren't we abolishing these things? Like,
right.
What good are they doing?
Well, the FBI was, I believe the FBI was dismantled and then brought back. I'm racking my brain right now.
I mean, literally after this stuff happened, there was the Church Committee, which is a high-profile, like, congressional investigation into the FBI and the CIA. Effectively, they didn't really do anything good. Like, they made some reforms, but, like, the actual effects of the reforms really just made the organizations more powerful or did nothing, one or the other. So it kind of didn't accomplish anything besides potentially making a lot of people believe that the CIA was behind the Kennedy assassination. Like, even though that wasn't their conclusion, it still made a lot of people believe that, you know, to have some of this information go public.
And something just to point out, and I think that I feel like this is fair to talk about now that Biden has dropped out of the presidential race. Biden was the face of anti-drug movement in the 90s. Like,
one of the faces, yeah.
He was one of the faces. It's the one thing that he's really remembered for doing. It's the one thing that he campaigned on over and over and over again and talked about how great it was. Would never do anything to make any changes to the judicial system in the country based on drugs. And I feel like it's important to bring up, especially in this context, based on what we're talking about, because if we go back to, I mean, this is, at this point, it's gone all the way to 2020, right? There's some link going back to all this shit that's still around now.
Right.
And we still haven't made any changes to any of this stuff since it's been brought up. And to your point, why haven't we demolished A, B, or C organization or made changes to things? It's because it's a lot harder to destroy. It's a lot harder to destroy something when it's grown more powerful over time. Right. Like the thing about it is they create these organizations without time limits, without dedicated time limits where they go, okay, this cannot be extended. This is only, we're only going to have this organization for 2 years while we investigate A, B, or C, right? It's let's make this organization and this is what its purpose is. And then when that purpose is fulfilled, they don't have anything else to do.
Sure.
So then they're given a new prerogative from the people who are in power to say, okay, this is also the thing that you should probably do now. And then on the side, they're just deciding what they do and expanding their own power that way too, right? So it becomes really difficult to make changes to this stuff, especially since, and it's a little bit of a side, but more aware, I think, of what's happening now than our parents or grandparents were ever actually aware of things that were actually happening around them. Yeah, right. We have the internet now. So think about the entire hold on the greater narrative of things up until very recently. Yeah. It was major news networks, and there were 3 of them, and just the New York Times and the LA Times. Like, that's what there was. And that's where you got your news.
Yeah. You just totally made me realize why it's absolutely possible that all of this was going on back then. There was no internet back then. Like,
there was no internet
back then. Like, you just didn't tell anybody. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, okay, I just have to reset how
4chan leakers back then. I mean, if there were... Nowadays, when there are, obviously, the CIA is on there also leaking stuff intentionally to confuse people or whatever, right? I mean, and probably, honestly, they've moved on. Everybody's moved on from 4chan by now, but, like, that's a particular example of, how both, I mean, information, like true information can be disseminated, but also very often people can disseminate false information using the internet too. So, I mean, it's like, I'm not sure that it's that they necessarily have less control over stuff like getting out. I think that they have adapted and that they're, they basically flood the news with other things, and some of that being false information that directly contradicts the true information, and some of it being just completely random stuff that has no relation, just to overload information and not, make what clear.
And they've had practice. They've been doing this shit since the 30s.
Right.
Like, ever since World War II, they've been doing this shit. And we can say that they've been doing it with all of the other things that we talk about, right? They've done it about alien stuff. They've done it about they've constantly gotten in the way or tried to push a narrative or tried to, just confuse the waters, like Rabb was saying. Like, they've been doing this for so long now. I mean, damn near 100 years they've been doing this shit.
Right.
So they've got plenty of practice in doing what they've got to do to make sure that we never find out what the fuck's going on. And one of those big things is we talked about the Kennedy assassination. Like, how many times are the most recent presidents going to be able to take a peek at those documents or say that they're going to release them, and then they look at them, or they're being told not to do so because it'll destabilize our country.
Right.
And
I bet it doesn't even destabilize the country. I bet it just destabilizes one of those 3-letter organizations. They're just like, you don't want all these people to lose their jobs, do you?
we do already think that it's the CIA had their hand in it. The problem is there anybody who's still alive, who's in power or still holds power, that could really be in a bad way if that information came out?
Yeah, I mean, everybody who could be punished for it, I think, is already gone. Like, maybe they're not dead, but they're like old and retired if they're not dead.
I mean, are there any Bushes in power?
Right.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be something that would damage somebody who's alive
Sure.
in a way that would really cause an upheaval and make people actually want to come together to make a real change. Like, that's the only thing that makes sense. Otherwise, they would have released the shit by now and told us what the fuck happened.
Well, yeah. I mean, Jeff did make a good point, kind of aside there. Like, George H.W. Bush was probably involved in the Kennedy assassination in some way.
Like, definitely involved. For sure involved. You know, and my guess is that the like Saudi money or whatever money like helped fund that is just still coming in.
Yeah, I mean, one thing flows into the next, basically. Yeah. Like, I mean, the Kennedy assassination was all like the mafia and people wanting to overthrow Cuba. Like, all that stuff was tied up in the Kennedy assassination. And what happens is that one thing flows into the next. And, you know, there's the, in the 70s, there's that, what was that bank called that was always, that had their hands all over everything? I can't remember what it is. I wish I knew what it was called. Hang on.
What, the Deutsche Bank?
No. What was it called? Of course, me Google searching it. Oh, BCCI. CI is a I searched US CIA bank, and I had to scroll down quite a while before I could find it, because Google is in on it too. The Bank of Credit and Commerce International was founded in 1972, so that's not that much longer after the Kennedy assassination. You know, became the focus of a massive regulatory battle in 1991, and basically was shut down at that point. And so, I mean, that bank spans multiple presidents, and the CIA was basically like taking money in and out of there all the time to do all kinds of crazy stuff all around the world. And so just that making a link to modern day, I mean, who knows what the next thing was, right? But like, if the Kennedy assassination details got out, like, maybe people could start connecting the dots. I really don't know. I mean, maybe there's some stuff that they really would stop. I mean, maybe they're too afraid of accidentally leaking something about an ongoing program.
You know what I'm starting to really think it is, and this is just off the wall. This is just some wild shit I'm gonna say. What it starts getting me to think is, if I think about the current climate of the world, right? It makes me wonder: was the assassination an attempt from our government context of colluding with another government, and information coming out that there was another country involved in the assassination of our president, and we helped them do, depending on what country that was, could push the people of this country into an all-out nuclear war. Because we're old enough, our generation is old enough to where we still kind of revere Kennedy in a way. And I feel like it would have enough impact on the two generations above millennials that there's enough of us that would be pissed off about it to actually do something. Once again, wild thought. No basis for evidence.
Yeah, I feel like the least true thing you said is that we would actually do something about it. Like, that to me seems the most unlikely, is that they're afraid.
But maybe that's what they're afraid of, is that we do something about it. I'm not saying we're going to do anything about anything. I mean, we can't fix a single thing. So what's it, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you think about the propaganda value of killing Kennedy, like that, the idea that we can't fix a single thing does start to sink in. Like, I mean, you get people running for president that clearly believe the CIA killed Kennedy. So, like, what is that going to do to someone's policies? I mean, what is that going to do when somebody sits them down and says, like, okay, you really can't do that. You really, really, really can't. Like, are they going to get the message? Probably.
You know, Rogan says the one reason why he wants to talk to Trump is because he wants to know what the fuck happens when they sit you down when you get into the office the first day. Because it seems like, you know, we say that politicians lie all the time about what they're going to do. They run for something and then don't fucking do it. Sure. Obama's a huge example of this. Like, I actually think he believed that he was going to change some shit. And then he got in and was told a whole bunch of shit that he didn't know before. And he's like, okay, well, my entire family's going to die if I don't fucking play ball here. And that's just what it is, right? Like, I mean, we've talked about the power of the three-letter organizations. We've also talked before about the power of the war complex. You know, like, when we talk about how much money and power and resources these organizations have, what's one person going to do regardless of whether or not they're president? Sure. Like, you're in the most danger. Like, they could pop you at any time, right? I don't know.
Well, I don't even know that they need to set them down and have a conversation with them. I mean, I think to some degree, like I said, I think that anybody who gets into the president's office probably knows. Like, maybe they had to sit Trump down, but like, I mean, I feel like Obama probably knew that they killed Kennedy somehow. I mean, like, I would think that he would come to that conclusion on his own, and be aware of that. And
he's said a couple of things publicly that are like, Bill Clinton wrote about something that was very similar to that in his memoir that he wrote. He couldn't say the actual words, right? Because those books have to get approved.
Sure.
But like he said, he kind of beat around the bush a little bit. Like, there's lots of anecdotal evidence.
Right.
From presidents. The same thing with aliens.
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything more to say about Charles Manson. I feel like we've covered now in these last 10 minutes, like, something that could be the topic for another 4 or 5 episodes. But how it always goes. I think we should probably call it here and wrap this one up.
So I'm gonna do a Wiggy rant. So those of you on the Patreon, get ready. I'm gonna set one up here. Probably in the next week, there's going to be a Wiggy rant.
And somebody needs to pay us enough money so that Jeff and I can make fun of the Wiggy rants, because that's I think our true calling, and he's not allowed to post them.
I don't think that we should be allowed to record one until we have somebody paying that money.
I agree.
Yeah. So
somebody's got to pony up the cash to make that happen, and you will be the only person to see the video at that point. So you can count yourself lucky.
Yeah, and to make this clear, so I'm going to rant about something because stuff pisses me off, and I'm going to rant about it. And then Jeff and Rabb are going to be able to watch that video and pick apart, make fun of me, whatever it is that they want to do. Maybe Rabb will agree with me every once in a while. I have a hope, but Jeff definitely won't. Jeff definitely
against
will
the
not.
spirit of the video.
It would be. Yeah, it would. Yeah, Jeff or Rabb is troll incarnate sometimes, so they get to make fun of me, all of that, but you only get to see that if you're on the Patreon, and you're going to watch, and you're going to want to watch the rant first so that you have the complete context of what they're making fun of. So
I assume we were going to Mystery Science Theater it and play your rant at the same time and talk.
Definitely
like reaction video content kind of thing.
Yeah, Jeff and I will be two shadowy heads sitting in a movie theater watching Wiggy on the big screen.
You ever use that Snapchat feature when you're doing where you can like make it where it's just your eyes and your lips that appear?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, pay us money so you can see all this good stuff. You can see the rants and you can see
this video. Like, you can see this podcast in video format.
Yeah, you can watch me put my head down and stumble looking for something in a book for like 4 minutes straight.
And completely unedited.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll probably be even longer for you.
Yep.
Yeah, so get on it. See you later, everybody.